Well, welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us tonight. Tonight we're going to make chicken gnocchi soup. Like Olive Gardens, I hope. I've never made this before, but my friend Meesha Marshall, asked for it, and since she's getting married, this is her wedding present. Take a moment to pause, write down the ingredients, and then we'll see what we can cook up together. Well, since I've never made this before, I did quite a bit of research and preparation, and you know, there are a lot of copycat Olive Garden recipes, but amazingly, they're very different. So I thought, well, I've got the basics here. We're just going to apply our soup sense and make the best chicken gnocchi soup we can. Starting out with some fresh chicken. These are thighs, probably breast are used more often, and you don't actually have to start here. If you have a rotisserie chicken or some chicken you've already baked, you can use that. But I think you're going to get a better product if you do this. So I'm browning these thighs. I'm actually cooking them all the way through. They don't cook a lot once you put them in the soup, so they should be done at this point. And I'm going to take them off. I'm putting them in a bowl to let them drain, and any juice that drains off I'm going to put back in the pan. Now see all this great fond that we created? This is why you get better results if you start with fresh chicken. The fond and the chicken fat are just going to add so much flavor. So I have a medium onion here, chopped not too finely, and this is a half cup of sliced carrots, and I also have a half cup of grated carrots that I'm going to add later. And then I'm going to add about a cup of celery. This is sort of a mirepoix. The proportions are not exactly the same, but it's going to serve the same purpose. I'm going to put just a little bit more olive oil in here. You want to add a healthy sprinkle of salt. That will help the vegetables sweat and release their flavor. Then I'm going to let these sit here and simmer for 2 or 3 minutes. We just want the vegetables to soften up, release their flavor. They'll turn translucent, everything except the carrots, and the carrots will have to cook a little bit more. And this will take 3 or 4 minutes on medium-high heat. And if you're not familiar with the term mirepoix, this is just a flavored base of vegetables, carrots, onions, and celery that form a foundation of flavor. And we cook them until they're weepy, letting loose their aroma and their flavor. And I'm adding 2 cloves of minced garlic, and I add that last because I don't want it to burn. Garlic just doesn't need to brown as much as the other veggies do, and if it cooks too long, it can take on a bitter taste, so we add it last. Now I'm going to move this to the back burner, and let it sit while we take our next steps. Time to start our water for the gnocchi. I've put in a healthy pinch of salt, some olive oil. I'm going to let this come to a boil while I'm cooking. Now we're going to make a roux. This is 1 stick of butter in my 4-quart cast iron Dutch oven, and I either lost my mind or my math skills because this is nowhere near big enough for this soup we're making. So in a little bit I'm going to have to switch to a bigger one. 1 stick of butter. This is a 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, and this is much thinner. This is a much thinner roux than what I normally make, but we don't want this to be a thick soup. We want it creamy. We want it thickened a little bit. If this is not as thick as you want this soup, use a 1/2 cup now instead of a 1/4, but I think this is going to turn out just great. So we're going to add in our chicken broth now, and you add it slowly. And this is technically a sauce velouté, which is a roux with broth added. One of the mother sauces, by the way, you can look it up. So I add it slowly, cold broth into a hot roux. Stir it well. You won't get lumps if you stir it well, and add it a little at a time. But don't expect this to get the velvety texture, velvety sheen of sauce velouté, because we're making this much thinner than a sauce velouté would be made. So you just want to get it all in and make sure you have no lumps. Stir it, stir it. And you know, this is really not going to be all that thin when we're done, because when we put the gnocchi in, it's going to have a thickening effect because of the starch. And we're also going to add cream in a bit, and that will make it richer too. So now the vegetables are going back in, and I could have actually just put the flour on the vegetables and done the process with them in the pan, but I wanted to keep a nice light color in the roux. So I made the mirepoix and the roux separately and then combined them. And there's a little olive oil floating on the top of this, but it's going to be absorbed. Don't worry about it. And it's bringing flavor. Now we want to add the other half cup of our carrots. And I did the carrots differently for no other reason than the appearance. I think the grated carrots are beautiful, and they didn't need to cook as much as the sliced carrots. So I split it up and did half and half. You know, I often say we taste with our eyes as well as our tongues, and the pictures I have seen of the Olive Garden soup have grated carrots. So when this comes just to a simmer, not a boil, we're going to add a quart of half and half. And I'll add it in a little at a time and stir it well. I don't actually think it would curdle if it were boiling, but I just never add cream to boiling water or boiling liquid. But I'm going to put this whole quart in. And you know, you could use heavy whipping cream, but I think half and half is just fine. And if you're keeping track of sauces, this is now a sauce supreme, only thinner. Just before I added the cream, I started the gnocchi cooking. It doesn't take long at all. It's starting to float, and it will be ready by the time the soup is hot. And you know, my gnocchi got a little bit out of shape, long and thin, but it's almost done, and it'll be good. I deboned and chopped up the chicken. I'm going to add it now. This is just about to come back to a simmer. And this is about where I realized that I'd lost my mind and I regained my sanity, and I'm going to have to switch to a 5-quart pot. So time to taste for salt and seasoning, and this was the first indication I had that this was an extraordinary soup. I understand why so many people love it. And it needs a little salt. I usually use unsalted broth. I'm sprinkling in red pepper flakes. Of course, you can use freshly ground black pepper if you prefer. And a big old pinch of thyme, fresh if you have it, but I have dried and it'll be fine. So when your gnocchi is done, just scoop it directly into the pot of soup. Just drain it a little bit. This is fresh gnocchi. I have a video. I'll post a link for you in the info section. Or you can buy dried gnocchi at the store and cook it up. But I have to tell you, fresh gnocchi is so much better, and it's easy to make. This is thickening the soup up just a little bit. It's still not too thick. It's a soup. But if you prefer it thicker, remember, use half cup of flour instead of a quarter. So you just want to let this come back to a simmer, and then we're ready to add our last ingredient. 1 cup of coarsely chopped spinach. And you kind of have to pack it down into the cup. And you can use more spinach if you like. I actually was hesitant about the spinach. I'm not a great fan of cooked spinach. But I have to tell you, I mean, all the recipes call for it. Olive Garden uses it. And I'm really glad I did. With the finished product, you'll be glad you added the spinach. And we're almost done. I've just let it come back up to a simmer. You can see the texture that we have here. I'm going to give it one more taste. I've added quite a bit since I added salt, and I want to make sure that it has enough salt. You know, I'm a great believer of salting while you cook and not at the table. But see this yummy stuff? Let's plate this up and see what we've got. Just look at that. Is that not gorgeous? I actually think this is one of those soups that is a meal. And see the texture there? You know, the texture is such a personal thing with soups. I don't want it any thicker than this. but you can surely make it thicker if that's your preference. I think I need to have a taste of this, even though it's pretty darn hot. And you know, sometimes I surprise myself because I had never had this soup and I have never made this soup. But oh my, I will make it now. This just has a richness of flavor I didn't even expect. So thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. And hey, Meesha, best wishes.